this is an interesting phenomenon in the fossil record. Pretty much everything you find in the fossil record is bigger. So the only change we're seeing is we've lost size. Wait a minute, doesn't evolution say that we started off as small protobacteria and got bigger over time? That's supposed to be extinct from the fossil record for 70 million years. Lo and behold, we found it alive today. Let me give you another example. This is a fossil ammonite, supposedly 300 million years old. Here's a nautilus, the modern form. Here's what 300 million years of evolution has accomplished. Absolutely nothing.
Now, today's topic is the Grand Canyon and Noah's Flood. And Ian Juby will be our presenter. Ian Juby is the president of the International Creation Science SIG for Mensa members and the director of the Creation Science Museum of Canada. That's a traveling museum, and he's often come to our museum here and set up his exhibits, and we're happy to have him around. His traveling museum is intended to minister to the spread out predominantly rural population of Canada to meet the museum's needs for displays. Ian started Scientific Creations. It's a business that fabricates custom museum displays and models. For over 15 years, Ian has researched and spoken about creation science through North America. His unique museum pieces are now in 7 different museums in Canada and the U.S., and he has also appeared on international television with his scientific models and research. He has a website. I think he'll fill us in on that. He's got a lot of neat things on the website. And Ian's been here this week with us to help us with a new exhibit that's coming out on Mount St. Helens. And earlier this year, he helped us with a Grand Canyon model. And Ian's here tonight to explain some of that from his firsthand experience and research at the Grand Canyon. So, without further ado, Ian, can you come up here?
Thank you, Josiah. Actually, I'm not going to show you my website because I figured everybody either knows me or they don't want to know me. So, one or the other. But for you who do want to know, it's ianjuby.org. If you do an internet search for Ian Juby, you'll find, I usually come up first, and you'll find all kinds of anti-Ian Juby diatribes on the internet as well. So it's good, I'm making an impression. Anyway, tonight's talk is on the Grand Canyon, and we didn't really know the demographics that would show up tonight. It's really good to see so many young people. So if you'll excuse me, we're probably going to bounce all over the place. We'll talk about the Grand Canyon and Noah's Flood, but if I wind up going into stuff that seems completely unrelated, that's mostly because we have children here tonight, and I wanted to do something that they would get something out of, because a lot of kids aren't into real in-depth geology. So, let's fire this up. I just got a couple of new displays, and this was one of them. I just picked it up in Glen Rose, Texas. Dinosaur World just opened up. I have wanted this specific fossil for about 4 years now. How many people were here for the talk I gave a couple weeks ago? 1, 2, 3. Okay, not many. Okay. No, he wasn't? Ah, too bad. The children will probably remember I talked about the death pose. And this is a very common thing you see in the fossil record. This is a classic example. You'll notice its head is arched back as far as it can go. Sometimes the tail is arched back as far as it can go. Sometimes it's straight. Sometimes the legs are flexed out like this. Sometimes they're bunched up. But the neck is the key. Now, this is very, very common in the fossil record. So common, it's actually got its own name, the death pose. And there really is only one way that can happen. And although I've been saying this for years, I was so happy to see an article come out in Paleobiology magazine last summer. And in Paleobiology magazine, Cynthia Fox and Kevin Davadian, I've forgotten his last name. Kevin Padian, that's it. Hardcore anti-creationist. He loves to hate people like me. They did an excellent article where they actually experimented with meat, tendons, live animals, etc. And the only way they could get it to be buried with its head back is if it was asphyxiated to death and buried rapidly. Gee, that's starting to sound like a catastrophe. Not long and slow geologic time. Very, very common in the fossil record. This comes from Ghost Ranch, New Mexico. And if you look very closely later on, these small bones down here are actually small ribs of what is believed to be either a baby dinosaur or an embryo. And there's still heated debate as to whether it actually ate its own young or not. Or perhaps it was giving birth to live dinosaurs, live young. The debate still rages. So that's one of the new displays. Now, one of the things I wanted to start with tonight, this may seem unrelated to the Grand Canyon and the flood. It is actually very much related. Most people think the creation-evolution debate started with Darwin. Thank you. There we go, right there. Most people think it started with Darwin. Believe it or not, it was not Darwin. So let's take a look at where this started. Believe it or not, it was rocks. It was actually geology. In fact, uniformitarian geology, as it has come to be known, I have argued that it is the most effective weapon that has ever been formed against the Bible, the Word of God. Hey, Josiah, where's Josiah? He's hiding. Can you find me a Bible? I forgot my Bible back at out the cabin. Do you have one? Yeah. You do? Okay. Okay, that's fine. I want to introduce you to three men, first of all. And I'm going to tie all this together so you'll understand it. You recognize these names? Luther, Finney, and Calvin. Recognize those names? Three men who, because of their strong Christian conviction, profoundly impacted the world, I would say for the better. But all three men had the same training. They were all trained for the same job. Does anybody know what it was? Thank you. Who said that? The smart guy. Hey, how'd you know that? Okay. He's right. They were all trained as lawyers. I think you're the first one who's ever given me that right answer, especially that fast. Okay. He's right. All three were trained as lawyers. Interesting. I want to introduce you to a fourth man, Sir Charles Lyell. Also profoundly impacted the world, I would say for the worse. He was also trained as a lawyer. Yet today he is known as one of the founding fathers of the modern science of geology. What? What is up with that? Why did he become the founding father of the modern science of geology? Bizarre. Now, he is the one who coined the phrase, the present is the key to the past. Pay close attention here. Has anybody seen a global flood recently? Have we observed one recently? No? Good, good, good. It was pretty close this morning. I don't know. but no, there has been no global flood. In fact, we have a specific promise by God himself that the world will never be flooded again. This is very interesting. This is not a scientific statement. This is a good argument. In fact, it is a good lawyer's tactic. It has nothing to do with reality. He just disqualified a global flood, the very possibility that there could have been a global flood. He just threw it out the window without even mentioning it. Did you notice that? He didn't mention the global flood, but he just ruled it out and said, no, 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 only present-day processes can be used to explain the past. Did you notice that? Very subtle. Now, I would argue, number one, the present cannot be the key to the past. I just gave you some reasons why. How do you carve out the Grand Canyon? You certainly can't do it by present-day processes. It takes something else. Secondly, I would argue the Bible is the key to the past. This is a literal history book of the universe and the world. And you notice today, did burning the Bible make it go away? Nope. Only made it stronger. Did banning it make it go away? Nope. Did killing off anyone who dared believe in it make it go away? No, it only made them stronger. However, today when you talk about this book as a literal history book of the universe, the first thing everyone says is, oh, the earth is billions of years old. That book says it's 6,000 years old. Clearly that book must be wrong. Where did all that start? Mr. Lyell. Now, we would not have known what Lyell's intentions were, except that after he died, his sister published his private writings. And in one of his letters, he wrote, I had conceived of the idea 5 or 6 years ago that if ever the Mosaic chronology could be set down without giving offense, it would be an historical sketch. Let me translate the Old English for you. I came up with the idea 5 or 6 years ago that if ever the history according to Moses, the Bible, could be discredited without offending its believers, I would do it by making up my own history. Did you follow that? It has nothing to do with reality. It has nothing to do with science. It was a lawyer's tactic. It was a lawyer's argument. Without ever mentioning the Bible, he would set about discrediting it by making up his own history. It's an excellent lawyer tactic. Never once mentioned the book you're attacking. And you'll notice he never did. Now, one of those places, I'll mention this very quickly. 2 Peter chapter 3, I believe the Apostle Peter actually prophesied Sir Charles Lyell and his great deception. Notice that in the end times he said, there will become a great deception, claiming that all things continue as they were from the beginning of creation. Gee, that sounds an awful similar to the present is the key to the past. And in fact, these people are willingly ignorant of the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. So, this great deception would say all things continue as they were, and there has been no global flood in the past. Gee, that's uniformitarian geology in a nutshell. You could hardly, you'd swear Peter wrote it today. That's how close it is. Now, one of those places Charles Lyell visited was this. You guys know where that is? Yeah. That's true, it is Canada and the U.S. Do you guys know where that is? New York. Yeah, New York. Niagara Falls. Okay, he got it. Okay, give that boy a prize. Do we have a prize? Yeah. We do. Excellent. Okay, claim your prize later on from your older brother there. Okay. It is Niagara Falls. Now, one of the places Charles Lyell visited was Niagara Falls. And when he went there, he noticed that the falls were eroding this gorge. In other words, the falls, as the water goes over the falls, there's a softer shale underneath the hard limestone on the top. It erodes that out, the limestone collapses, falls, and gets eroded away, and slowly and surely this gorge is cut back and back farther towards Lake Erie. Now, he must have looked at that and said, aha, we have a clock. We can tell how old this gorge is simply by figuring out how fast it erodes the gorge, and we can then take a guesstimate as to how old the gorge is. So, in the name of good science, did he go and measure the erosion rates of the gorge? Nope. Instead, he asked a local individual, he said, how fast is that gorge eroding? And the local said, well, I've been eyeballing this tree on this side and a tree on the far side. I would say it's eroding at about 3 feet per year. So, is that what Lyell wrote in his book, 3 feet per year? Nope. Instead, Lyell assumed that the local was exaggerating, and what he wrote in his book, now pay close attention here, he never once mentioned the Bible. What he wrote in his book was, Niagara Falls is eroding the gorge at 1 foot per year. It is 35,000 feet long, therefore the earth cannot be 6,000 years old. Everyone in his day knew the Bible claimed the earth was 6,000 years old. He had just scientifically discredited the Bible without ever mentioning it once. That's a good lawyer tactic. Has nothing to do with good science. Now, let's examine Charles Lyell's science and see how good it is. Now, this is some of my own first-hand research. Some of this is older stuff. But last year, as I was leaving this very place, before I left Akron, I called up my good friend Ian Taylor in Ontario to see if he was home to stop in for a visit. He said, I'm so glad you called. I was going to try and call you. Because that day, this drawing, the first known drawing of Niagara Falls, had just been published in a newspaper. And so he faxed a copy to me over at Kinko's, right here in town. I grabbed a copy. I looked at it and said, what? This is confusing. Okay, here's how it works. This is the New York side. So it was drawn from the New York side. There's Goat Island. This is what is now the Canadian Falls. This is now the American Falls. Now, Tovil, one of the experts in the Niagara Gorge, said the drawing was exaggerated, done from memory, etc. Really, is it? I went there, and within 15 minutes of trying to figure out where this drawing was made from, within 15 minutes I had it nailed down. Problem is, Knights of Columbus beat me to it. In 1910, they dedicated this rock, complete with a plaque, to Hennepin View. We both pinpointed exactly the same location that drawing was made from. Why? Well, it's very simple. There's major portions of that drawing that are still there today, major landmarks. This is Prospect Point. Now that collapsed in the 50s. It's been reconstructed since, but it's Prospect Point. This curve in the river, notice that curve, and the outcrop overhanging a large landing in the bottom of the river. There is only one place that that could be today. There's Prospect Point, and there is the curve in the river. This is now the Canadian side looking downstream. There's the curve in the river, the outcrop, and the landing, which is now being used for the Maid of the Mist. It's the only major landing in the whole area. The geography and the major landmarks line up perfectly. Now, here's the catch. I'm going to skip past that. Here's where it would place the falls in Hennepin's time. Okay, that works out to, if we take the conservative estimate, that works out to an average erosion rate of 12 feet per year. What did Charles Lyell write in his book? 1 foot per year. Was he even close? No. In fact, in modern times, when good science was done, they actually measured the erosion rates. Guess what they found out? It was eroding at 5 feet per year, when actually good science was done. However, when you take a look at the historical drawings, it blows even that number out of the water. If you go by the extreme distance, it's as much as 14.5 feet per year. Lyell's number was out by as much as a factor of 14.5. He wasn't even close. Problem was, everyone who read Lyell's book knew that he had just discredited and disproved the Bible. One of those people who picked up Charles Lyell's book was none other than a young man by the name of, can anybody guess? Charles Darwin, on his voyage on the Beagle. And now Charles Darwin had his old Earth in which to place his biological evolution. The debate did not start with Darwin. It started with Lyell, a lawyer. Okay, I'm going to skip through all this. There's a lot more to this. I'll just mention it in passing. Whoops. Just to show you that 14.5 feet per year is still nothing. If you go downstream, you have the whirlpool. The river takes a dog's leg turn. Why? It's because there's actually an old buried gorge there. It was already pre-cut, and it's been filled in with dirt and mud and loose rocks. And so when the river went upstream, started carving a new gorge, it hit this one, it took a turn and just followed it. So all this probably, well, who knows, that could have taken days to erode. Doesn't take thousands of years at all. It can happen in days. So again, Lyell's figures are just way out to lunch. In fact, that buried gorge was a major problem for the hydroelectric production because they had, you can see here, they've just carved a riverbed through the solid limestone, but when they came here, they had to actually line the whole thing with concrete in order to keep their water. Otherwise, the water would just go into the old gorge, wash it all away, and make a new gorge. They didn't want that for some reason. Anyway. Okay, I'm going to sum it up for this, and just move along real quick. With all due respect to my old earth brothers and sisters in Christ, those who believe in an old earth, you need to understand something. The old earth was introduced for only one reason, to explain away the evidence of Noah's flood. There was no other reason. It had no scientific basis. It was one man's religious motivations. So, if you conclude that there's an old earth, that means you're saying there was no past global flood, the flood of Noah, and if there's no past global flood, then that means this book, Jesus Christ, and all the apostles are flat out wrong. So if you believe in an old earth, you actually compromise the very gospel message you claim to follow. With all due respect, I don't mean to step on toes, but that is the bottom line. Because what did Jesus say? As was in the days of Noah, days before it covered the highest mountain. That's 5 months. That's a long time. That changes the geology and the processes radically. Now, when it did, it covered all the mountains under all the heavens by at least 15 cubits. How many mountains? All. Now, this is scripturally speaking now. Whether it's true or not, that remains to be seen. This is what the Bible says. Everything on the face of the earth was destroyed. How much? Everything. There's no getting around it. This isn't allegory. This isn't a local flood. No, this was a global flood. And I've had the privilege to get to study that evidence in particular for the past 5 years. and continues to blow me away to this day. So 150 days later, obviously we're not underwater now, are we? So the water left the continents. That's, again, another very important process. Now, here's what this would mean. It would produce layers, fossil sorting. For example, you would probably expect a dinosaur could outrun a clam in a flood. So typically the clams are going to get buried first, dinosaurs last, typically. You're going to find billions of dead things buried all over the world. Now, here's my nice little Windows paint drawing. Here's my nice pre-flood mountain, okay, and here's the ocean. So the water's going to start rising. Today, our oceans go up and down twice a day. Pop quiz for the young guys. Why do our oceans go up and down twice a day? What are they called? I was looking for a one-word answer. The moon's gravitational pull. He's absolutely right. So when the moon is on the other side of the world, why does the water go up? Oh, gotcha. Okay. It's centrifugal force. Anyway, he's right. It's the tides, right? That's what you meant to say, right? Yeah, okay. So, are tides going to be in action during the flood? Well, of course. If anything, they're going to be enhanced. And so, every 12 hours, the water is continually rising. The water comes up. As it does, deposits a whole pile of dirt. I won't get into the subject tonight of where did all the dirt come from. It's actually a very simple explanation, but that's an hour-long talk in itself. Fascinating subject, but I won't get into that. So water comes up during high tide, dumps a bunch of dirt, goes out during low tide. Comes back in again 12 hours later, lays down another layer, goes back out during low tide. Comes back in, lays down another layer. During low tide, dinosaurs are hungry because it's been months of dodging water. They perhaps walk out on the new tidal flats. They may have dinosaur eggs they got to ditch because they've been carrying them for weeks. And that's why we find dinosaur eggs continuously in what they call tidal flats. You find dinosaur fossil footprints. Maybe some humans walked out there. That's another subject. This is very interesting. You remember that horrible tsunami that happened the day after Christmas in Indonesia a couple years back? There was really only 3 waves. And what we learned was each wave would lay down 3 to 5 layers. Interesting. It's not 1 wave per layer. 1 wave could lay down multiple layers. So, now we're going to get into, this is the fancy new high-tech model they got here at the museum now. See, I've been using it in my presentations there, Josiah. I pirated a picture of it. So, give you a quick tour of the Grand Canyon. And we'll talk about some of the flood processes. I showed you some of the reasons why it can't be carved by the Colorado River, so what did carve it? I would suggest it was one of 2 things. You remember the flood waters on the land went off the land? I would suggest that was one of them, or, as Dr. Walter Brown has suggested, perhaps some water got trapped after the flood in 2 giant inland lakes. They breached their dam sometime after the flood and carved the Grand Canyon. Don't know. I was part of a forum. We had 7 geologists, Walt Brown and Mike Ord, in debate. We drove 1,200 miles all over the Grand Canyon looking at the evidence firsthand. We were supposed to decide who was right. We hung the jury. It's pretty complicated. Okay? So, what we have down here, you see these tilted layers? That's the Grand Canyon supergroup. So if you guys ever go to the Grand Canyon, you can see that from Indian Point, is what they call it. You'll actually notice the tilted layers. And then across the top of that, you have a layer called the Tapete sandstone that cut across them, eroded them more or less flat. And then on top of that, you have the Bright Angel shale, which is a very green, olive green shale. It really is green. Then the Muav limestone, the Redwall limestone, these 2 combined make about 500-foot high cliffs alone, just those 2 layers. It's really impressive. And by the way, it's really impressive to hike down there and hike all the way back up again. That took me 6 hours of trudging uphill a whole way. Believe me, it was all uphill. Then above that, you have a sequence of 6 layers called the Supai group, a bunch of different types of rock. Then above that, you have the Coconino sandstone. I'm going to talk about that and show you fossil footprints from the Coconino. And then on top of that, you have the Kaibab limestone, and if you ever go to Grand Canyon, that's what you're walking around on top of, up there. Okay, so let's take a look. Where am I going next? Oh yes, okay. First thing you can do when you go to the Grand Canyon. All these layers are claimed to have taken somewhere between 500 million and a couple of billion years to form. That's a really long time. Let's examine that for a second. First thing you'll notice when you go to the Grand Canyon, you can notice that all the layers are parallel to each other. Now let's give them their millions of years. They want it? Fine. Here you go. Lock, stock, and barrel. Over time, everyone agrees the layers are laid down horizontally, originally. Now, today, is our land not tipping and buckling and faulting and doing all kinds of weird stuff? We can watch that today. So you think it's going to happen over billions of years? Yeah. In fact, it's going to be enhanced. You're going to have a long time to have all that happen. So let's say the land tilts sometime after these two layers were formed, okay? The new layers come in, they're still being laid down horizontal. And so you would immediately see the tilt that was previously there. It would be very evident in the layers. It would be clear to see. Now let's do a touch of math. Within the Grand Canyon and many spots, you can easily see 10 miles wide in any given spot pretty much. That's a long piece. You'll notice all the layers are perfectly parallel to each other, even over 10 miles. Okay, let's do a little bit of math. Have you guys done trigonometry? Can you say trigonometry? He's trying. All right, good man, good man. He's pretty close, actually. Okay, let's do a bit of trigonometry. It was hilarious. I just got back from Glen Rose. Professor Emeritus M.E. Clark and I, Mensa boy, we're down there working on the flume, and we're trying to figure out the math to tilt the flume 1 degree. And do you think we could do it? No way. Between the two of us, we were just lost, even with a calculator. Well, anyway, we figured it out eventually. Okay. But fortunately, I did the math for this on the internet, so I know it's right. Okay. So, if the land tilted even 1 degree, only 1 degree, that's not much, is it? 1 degree. If the land tilted 1 degree during the laying of those layers, and then the next layer got laid in horizontally, within a 10-mile viewpoint, you would see a 920-foot thick layer thin into nothing. In other words, this layer, now laid in horizontally, should be 921 feet thicker on one end within eyesight than the other end. Is that what we see? No, absolutely not. It's all perfectly parallel to each other. In fact, the Redwall limestone, which is one of the most prominent cliffs in the Grand Canyon, it's only 500 feet thick. We should see complete vanishing of layers. That's not what we see. I would argue that it is not the tilting of the land that's missing, it's the deep time that's missing. That's what's missing. Okay, here you go. Here's Indian Point. Here's the tilted layers of the supergroup. There's the Tapete Sandstone. Now, one of the reasons I went down into the Grand Canyon was to look for fossil footprints in the Tapete Sandstone. I think that's what I got next. No, it isn't. I'll come to that in just a second. That layer, the Tapete Sandstone, was originally believed to be the beaches of a calm, placid sea. Well, it's now known that it was actually more likely a mudslide, an underwater mudslide, booking along at about 90 miles an hour or faster. Why? Because it sheared off those layers. That's how we know. Now here's the thing. That layer covers almost a half of North America. That yellow is a map of it. Now that layer down here again is called the Tapete Sandstone. In the Midwest it's called the Lamotte Sandstone. Up where I live in Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia, it's called the Potsdam Sandstone. Up here in Wyoming, Montana, and the Upper West, it's called the Flathead Sandstone. And there it is. There's the basement rocks, and there is the layered Flathead Sandstone, exactly like the Tapetes, identical. Now, when we take a look at the layer, here's the fossil footprints. It doesn't look like much. And here's a cast of one of them. You can actually see the toes, the toe impression. And this is very important for identifying a fossil footprint, the displaced mud. You know, when you walk in mud, your foot actually displaces some of the dirt. So that's key. And they're all over the place in the Tapete Sandstone. Now, the actual location is secret. If you hang tight, Vance and I, once we finish our research trip in May, will be revealing where these are. And if you want to take a hike, you can go look at them yourself. And you can verify for yourself. But there's dozens of them. I counted upwards around 40, just in the small area I looked at. Now, here's the thing. That rock is supposed to be 500 million years old. According to evolution, there was no land-dwelling animals till 100 million years after that. Uh-oh. What's that? Yeah, let alone humans, yeah. I don't know that they're human. They actually, I don't want to say this publicly, but I'm going to. We have looked at that and we have compared it to human tracks. Now, when you go to the Grand Canyon or Zion National Monument, they tell you these are fossilized sand dunes. Now, that sounds at first like it poses a problem for a global flood, doesn't it? I mean, these layers were supposed to have been laid down in the middle of a raging global flood. How can you have a dry, barren desert in the middle of a raging flood? Doesn't make sense. Or could it be they're not fossil desert dunes? They were actually made by water. You'll notice the tracks only ever go uphill. Sometimes they go uphill walking sideways. Notice it takes an angle. It's called crab tracking because crabs walk sideways, so they call it crab tracking. Sometimes, oh, by the way, there's the fossil footprints in the Coconino. This is, 1,500 feet higher than the Tapeats. Notice some similarities? In fact, I think I have a picture coming up next. I'll let you be the judge. Yep, there it is there. Hard to see, but take a look. Whoops. Don't press the button. Don't press the button again. Give me a second. There we go. Okay. I'll let you be the judge, but they look awful similar to me. So what on earth is amphibians doing down in the Tapeats? They're not supposed to be there. Okay, and I forgot where I was going. Oh yes, okay. There it is. These tracks also will go from very deep impressions, and within feet, literally, they go from very deep impressions to lighter, to claws only, to completely vanishing. Did they grow wings and fly away? What on earth happened there? Is this the fastest evolution we have evidence for? Okay, let's take a look at some modern sand dunes. Conveniently, as I was driving through New Mexico, someone cut through a sand dune for me with a bulldozer. I thought that was very nice of them. You'll notice the layers, yeah, they do go up. They also come down on the other side. It's a wave. They're not cross beds, they're a wave. So these clearly aren't cross beds then. What's going on there? I'm going to skip through all this. Now, some have also argued that water cannot produce cross beds that are steep enough, and as we see in the Coconino. Now, this is experiments we carried out in Glen Rose, where I just came back from. Many have claimed you can't make cross beds with water that are steeper than 10 degrees. Well, in fact, there it is right there in a geology textbook. In fact, what he said there is it will not get steeper than 33 degrees if you make it with water. Well, let's bust that myth wide open. I personally made these cross beds. You recognize them? Made them in a flume down in Glen Rose. You know what we did? And this is something even young kids can do at home if you guys feel like playing in the mud. We just took a cement mixer. We took a clear box with clear sides. We ran water in one end and let it pour out the other. So we filled the cement mixer with dirt, continually added water, and slowly poured it in with this going uphill 1 degree. That's all we did. What happens, the water comes in, here it's moving fast enough, it's moving this direction, it's moving fast enough here that it can carry dirt. However, water collected here and made standing water. So as it's flowing in, it would hit the standing water, and it would now no longer be transporting sand fast enough, and it would drop it just like a conveyor belt. And it would make cross beds over and over and over again. So here's what we did next. Do you guys have any newts for a pet by chance? No? Anybody have pets, pet newts? You do? Maybe? Okay. I wanted them for an experiment. That's why I was asking. But, just to show you so you can see it with your own 2 eyes. If I can. There it goes. Okay. So the water's flowing in from the left, hitting the standing water, and dropping its dirt, continually making cross beds. So what we did next is we went to the pet store and we bought a couple of newts, because we wanted to simulate what we saw in the Coconino sandstone. And I figured, you know what? I suspect we're going to learn something here. Oh boy, did we ever. Well, here's a, oh, okay, this is a close-up. I'm going to skip through this. Goodbye, goodbye. Okay, so what about those footprints? Let's take a look at them, okay? Derek Ager, a hardcore anti-creationist and world-famous geologist, tried to explain away the fact that the tracks only go uphill. He assumed they were desert dunes. So he said, well, that's because only the tracks on the lee side of the dunes were preserved. The ones that were on the windward side got erased by the wind. If you stop and think about that, that makes no sense whatsoever. That means all the animals would have to go in the same direction at all times in the desert. Stop and think about it. Apparently Dr. Ager did not. Very brilliant man. Why he would say something so silly is beyond me. Only tracks going uphill are preserved. Someone actually suggested this to me, that when you walk downhill, you actually don't make tracks. All right, let's check this. Okay, number one. Here we are in White Sands, New Mexico, clearly a desert. I see footprints going uphill, downhill, across the dunes, in all directions. I walked down the hill and I walked up the hill. Judge for yourself. It makes footprints going both ways. Lastly, this is uniformitarian tactic number 54. Slip in the assumptions when they're not looking. These aren't sand dunes that we're looking at in the crossbeds. They are crossbeds. These are not crossbeds. They're sand dunes. They're drastically different. Okay, here's one of our poor newts. Actually, they were pretty happy. We should have gotten lizards because they weren't as docile. And we threw them in the flume. And if I can, there's my pointer. So watch what happened when we put them in the flume and made crossbeds. Here's one. He's on top of the crossbeds, happily fighting the current. The other one, however, found his way to the bottom set, and my finger's pointing to his foot. You can actually see his head right there. Notice where he's hanging out. Why? Because the water coming this way makes a back current, makes an eddy right there. That's the place of the least amount of current. And so, what happened is the newts, or the amphibians, would hang out right here. There's only one way out. If they go this way, they have to fight a current. If they go this way, it's the way of least resistance, uphill. They make footprints, and lo, they get picked up by the current and swept away. Remember those tracks going uphill and vanishing? Suddenly makes complete sense. Why? Because of a whole lot of water. Not just a little bit either. Interestingly, that same current could also sweep them back into the eddy, and you have the same creature making footprints on multiple crossbeds for who knows how long. Don't know how long. Makes complete sense within the context of a global flood. If you try and explain it as desert dunes or with deep time, you start scratching your head at the explanations they give. Makes no sense. Okay, oh yes, the one thing I didn't show you, and I'll cover this real quick, and then we'll go into the fossils I have up here. These are also from the Coconino sandstones. They're supposedly fossil spider tracks. Now the first thing the evolutionists bring up to me is fossil spider tracks and the fossil scorpion tracks, which I don't have an example of, but you do find in the Coconino as well. And they say, come on, don't be silly. It can't be underwater. Spiders don't live underwater. Scorpions don't live underwater. Nonsense. Well, first of all, if you've ever had, has anybody here, I'm curious, has anybody here had a, you know those really big spiders, the tarantulas? Has anybody ever had a tarantula sitting on their arm? You have? Could you feel it? Barely, eh? They are so light that first of all, they'll float if they are in water. So I agree with the evolutionists on that point. However, they are so light, they are not going to leave tracks in sand. They won't. However, the sea spider will. It is in fact negatively buoyant. It's so dense it will sit in the bottom of the water, and it's dense enough to make tracks in sand. You know what? I think those are sea spider tracks. I don't think those are spider tracks at all. So what about those scorpion tracks? Well, they could be the sea scorpion, but you know what? Let's assume for a second that they are actually scorpion tracks, just for the sake of argument. Well, it's actually well known, the scorpion tracks, the same fossil scorpion tracks, guess where else you find them? Canadian Arctic on Ellesmere Island. Certainly not a desert now. At Joggins, another place where I've done a pile of research, guess what they found there? Lizards, sharks, coelacanth, Spirorbis worms, which is a marine worm, horseshoe crabs, again, from the sea, giant sow bugs called Arthropleura, and a damselfly. Nothing desert-like at all. And what else do they find? They find amphibians, just like we see in Coconino, and a fossil scorpion. Nobody's claiming that's a desert. Furthermore, scorpions can live underwater for days. This poor lady went to go for a swim in her pool, and here's the scorpion just sitting on the steps, merrily waiting for her to come along to sting her. underwater. She actually took a picture of it. It was very much alive. I don't know exactly how long. I've been told 8 days by a child who has apparently one of the best websites in the world on scorpions. I was told he was 8 years old. Anyway, apparently they can live for up to 8 days underwater. I can tell you this. This lady, I mean, that thing was down there for days, still very much alive. They can survive for days. Okay, what I'm going to skip to, oh yeah, last thing. So how much time we got left? 10 minutes? Oh, tons of time, tons of time. Okay, who cares if the Grand Canyon was carved out by water? Who cares if it took millions of years or a short amount of time? I mean, well, really, who cares? I'll tell you why it's important. Anybody recognize that name, Charles Templeton? He was actually a friend of Billy Graham's. He too was a very large name evangelist. This guy preached to groups of 30,000 people. He had thousands of people saved during his evangelistic crusades. Later on, he walked away from the faith and became an atheist, and actually wrote a book, Farewell to God, My Reasons for Abandoning the Christian Faith. What happened? It all started with the age of the earth. You see, the atheists know full well, if the earth is old, then this book is wrong. Jesus Christ is wrong. The apostles are wrong. Plain and simple. So if the earth is old, this book and the Christian faith is flat out wrong. The atheists know that. And that is why the age of the earth is so crucial. And this is only one of many examples of, unfortunately, a man who, I hate to say it, was deceived. Flat out deceived. I've shown you some of the reasons why the earth cannot be old. In fact, there's major consequences with the moment you try and invoke an old earth. There are major consequences to that assumption. Okay, I'm going to do a stark contrast here for the children. I got a bunch of fossils up here, and I got a pop quiz for the children. First of all, does anybody know what that is? Okay, that's true. Good answer. It's a fish. Does anybody know what kind? No? Good guess, good guess. What? I have no idea. I'll tell you. It's a herring. How do we know it's a herring? Well, actually a stamped idea, but anyway, good answer. Because of the fins, the overall shape. In other words, it looks like a herring. Right? Okay? So, bearing that in mind, I'll pass this around. Have you guys seen this one already? You did? Okay. I'll pass this one around. Just a quick note. Oh, you remember it. Yeah, okay. A quick note. You'll please notice that although it's the size of a fish, it is no longer the thickness of a fish. Okay? It's been squished paper thin. So thin that the bones are actually jutting out through the skin. So be real careful with it. I want that back. Now, this is a fossil leaf. Does anybody know what tree that's off of? Nope, not a maple. Does look similar to a maple. Nope. No. Who said that? You got it again. Okay, this guy's done his homework. Okay, he's right. How do you know it's a sycamore leaf? Okay. Okay. It wasn't the right answer, but you had the right answer. What was the right answer? It looks like one. We know it's a sycamore leaf. Now, some adults will complain and gripe and say, oh, you don't know anything about species. No, that has nothing to do with it. Take a look at the variety you see in species today. Compare a French poodle, a wiener dog, and a Great Dane. This is the variety you can get within the species. So pointing out minuscule little changes between Nidia and a herring is, frankly, a red herring. Pun intended. It has nothing to do with reality, okay? It's the same fish. So I'll pass this one around as well. By the way, these are genuine fossils. This is a very nice fossil. I doubt anyone will recognize this, but it is possible. It's a pine cone. Do you know which? You're absolutely right. Do you know which pine? Nope. It's the redwood. I believe so. I've forgotten. It's the redwoods anyway. And it's cut in half. You can actually see some of the seeds still preserved inside. How do we know it's a redwood cone? Looks like one. Exactly the same. We can even identify it. Now today, anybody recognize that plant? This is only a small chunk of it. It's called the, what? Horsetail, you got it, okay. You must be part of the Detweiler family. Man, getting all the right answers. He's right, that's a horsetail. Now there's one small difference. We do find it in the fossil record. It's very easy to identify, but there's one small difference. Pun intended. Yes, very big. Now this is an interesting phenomenon in the fossil record. Pretty much everything you find in the fossil record is bigger. So the only change we're seeing is we've lost size. Wait a minute, doesn't evolution say that we started off as small protobacteria and got bigger over time? Aren't we seeing the exact opposite? Now, of course, yes, I believe it's environmental, but this is a major important point. Now, the thing I want to hit home here, again, they're the same, if you pass those around. What's that? Oh, it broke. What was the next one? Oh, yes. I won't pass this one around because it's just a cast anyway. Anybody recognize that fish? Still around today. Nope, nope, nope. Who said that? Good man, you're right. You win another prize. Do you have another prize? Sure. Okay, you get another prize. Collect it from your brother. He'll pay up. He's right. It's a garfish. How do you know it's a garfish? You saw one at your friend's. Does it look like this? They look like them. It's very simple. Garfish are still around today. Now, here's the point I want to make, and I'll give you a couple more examples. My Bible, 10 times, or Josiah's Bible, 10 times in the first chapter of Genesis alone says God reproduced things God created things to reproduce after their kind. 10 times it says that in the first chapter of Genesis alone. Evolution says things change over time. What are we seeing? Change over time, or things reproducing faithfully after their kind? Even in the fossil record, some of these fossils, like those fossil fish, are supposed to be 100 million years old. The coelacanth, if you come to the golf tournament tomorrow, you'll see Cindy's rendition of the coelacanth. That's supposed to be extinct from the fossil record for 70 million years. Lo and behold, we found it alive today. We find it as old as 450 million years old in the fossil record. It hasn't changed one iota. 450 million years has produced nothing. Let me give you another example. This is a fossil ammonite, supposedly 300 million years old. Here's a nautilus, the modern form. Here's what 300 million years of evolution has accomplished. Absolutely nothing. Things have reproduced faithfully after their kind. This is powerful evidence for creation and powerful evidence refuting evolution. Stasis in the fossil record is a major problem. And the last one, I'm not going to pass this one around because it's pretty fragile. It's just a cast. Does anybody recognize that? It's a stingray. You got it. How do we know? It looks like one. They're still around today. Nothing has changed over time. Contrary to what we're frequently told, what we're seeing in the fossil record is a loss of size, a loss of variety, and extinction. That is what we've seen, not progressive development over time. Okay, Josiah, you want to close it?
Okay, well, a lot of people have asked me, Paul, what is the Akron Fossils and Science Center? What actually do you do there? And the answer to that question is that the Akron Fossils and Science Center is a science center that's devoted to teaching creation science. In other words, we have chosen the creation science intelligent design model in our teaching, telling the story of origins from the creation science standpoint. The evolutionary model has a different approach, and we do compare the two of them, but our whole emphasis is that creation science is for real, and we have devoted our museum to try to organize that in such a way that we tell that story. So we have been asked the question, well, what makes your museum unique? And how have you organized your museum in such a way that it's distinct from other places? What we've done is we've organized the museum in such a way that we actually look at the science that supports the creation model. Now we compare the two models, the evolutionary model and the creation model. But we want people to look at the science that supports the creation model in a no-kidding way. In other words, we want it to be cutting edge in terms of what the science happens to say. So we've designed it in such a way that half of the museum devotes its time to looking at the science and asking the question, what does the evidence best point to, an evolutionary model or a creation model? The second part of the museum, and in fact in the first part of the museum, we don't even talk about deity. We only look at the science. The second half of the museum is organized in such a way that we tell the biblical story, and we ask the question, does the biblical story match what we see on the scientific side? In addition to the museum itself, we've also developed an outdoor adventure land that we call Truassic Park. The Adventureland is really designed for people just to have a lot of fun. In the tour, we teach the kids how to make a paper airplane that'll fly for 200 feet, and we take them outside and they get to fly it. We shoot water balloons at dinosaurs. We have a 200-foot zip line. We have a 56-foot slide. We have a 4-person helicopter swing. Lots of fun things for the kids to do, so that not only will they have the opportunity to take a look at the real questions of the two different models that we present, but also have an opportunity to go outside and just have a lot of fun. In addition to the museum and the outdoor adventure lane, we also have some very interesting programs that we offer. One of our favorite programs is Museum in a Backpack, where we actually come out and speak to your group and share with you some of the messages that we try to accomplish in the museum. That's been very popular because people can actually get a taste for the museum. We also have our summer camps program. Our summer camp is designed around a kind of a day camp, and with all kinds of fun things for the kids to do and discover and that kind of thing. We also have Super Science Saturday, which occurs once a month, where the kids come in and do an experiment. We have Science Adventure Club once a month, where the little bit older kids do a little bit more in-depth work in some of our science research projects. We also have a lecture series where we invite professionals in to speak in their particular area of expertise. And what's very interesting, we're doing more and more of, is we're actually teaching science classes at the museum. One of our staff persons, of course, is a science teacher. And in that process, we're able to offer people, particularly homeschoolers, the chance to cover science. In homeschooling, many times math and science are difficult, so we have the chance to plug a hole for them in that area with our staff science classes. And she's also responsible for our research project. We're doing a science research project on the ditch, the creek that runs along the property. The other program that we do have actively going on is the Boundary Waters Canoe Adventure. We actually take people up to the Minnesota-Canadian boundary waters in the canoe area and have an expedition up there. We do some water sampling, and it's a very pristine wilderness. We do water sampling for the state of Minnesota. You can still drink out of the lakes up there. That's how pristine it is, and it's a really, really fun adventure for those who are willing to do so. One of the questions is, how can we be of service to you? How can we impact your particular group in a meaningful way? We have done that in a variety of ways. I had mentioned earlier that we have our Museum in a Backpack. And that's an opportunity for us to come to your organization, whether it happens to be an adult group, a kids group, or even a an organization that's trying to look at this whole issue of creation versus evolution, we can come out to your place and actually present, give you a taste, if you will, of the museum. We bring our fossils and our bones and we talk about fossilization and some of the actual evidence and so forth. But we're really here to help you strengthen your belief that there is a creator and that the created universe supports that in a no-kidding scientific way. We also exist for you to be able to be very, very comfortable about bringing skeptics. We want you to be strengthened, of course, but we want you to feel comfortable bringing a skeptic, because this is a pretty serious approach that we've made here in terms of the way we've designed the museum. We want you to be able to bring your head in the front door, ask the hard questions, and let the evidence speak for itself. So we want to be seen and used, in addition to the programs that we obviously have, in a way that can support your message and your ability to communicate this whole business of creation science in a meaningful way.
For more information about tours, lectures, camps, classes, birthday parties, or anything else in this presentation, please call 1-330-665-DINO or visit our website at www.akronfossils.com.